The Senate is moving towards putting President Trump on trial, with Mitch McConnell touting a plan with similar rules to the 1999 Clinton impeachment trial, providing that there were opening arguments before any decisions about calling witnesses. It's true that trial did use traditional Senate rules that delay the debate over witnesses until during the trial. But Democrats stress there's no logic in applying the Clinton precedents unfairly, noting that before those trial votes, all the key Clinton witnesses had already testified under oath, while these days many Trump aides have been defying such requests.
If we were going to have the Clinton precedent apply here, all of these witnesses should testify even before the trial begins. Mitch McConnell is being very selective in application of the Clinton precedent.
This is one of several high-stakes battles over the rules from 21 years ago, a seemingly ancient time when that trial began with an agreement on procedures that was so bipartisan it was unanimous. And when members of the president's own party not only criticized him publicly, a contrast to today's lockstep defense of Trump's admitted pursuit of foreign help with his campaign by Republicans. Now, what would those senators think on the eve of this first impeachment trial since then? It would be striking to get their perspective, especially since some of their former colleagues are leading Trump's defense in the upper chamber. Well, we have something special tonight on that right now, and you won't see it anywhere else on TV. 6 people who served as Senate jurors during the Clinton impeachment, who publicly committed to be impartial and seriously reckoned with Clinton's conduct, many advocating formal censure.
Such behavior is not just inappropriate. It is immoral.
But the question now is a Senate trial on impeachment, which is very serious and very sobering.
I came into this trial several weeks ago and took an oath to be impartial, and I meant it because I am very angry at the president for his inappropriate behavior.
Someone wants to censure the president for wrongdoing, which he is clearly guilty of. It should be in the form of a censure resolution. I think you'd have bipartisan support for it.
We will hear how those points apply now in a moment from this special group of panelists. We're convening this discussion because the trial that's about to begin is not only about the president. It's also about the Senate. That was true in the 1868 Johnson impeachment as the Senate defined national boundaries after the Civil War. And in 1999, as the upper chamber tried to rise above the sharp partisan politics of the House and other parts of politics in general, the Senate of that era was overwhelmingly male and white. The number of women members has since tripled. And we extended invites, we should mention, to the majority of living veterans of that 1999 class for tonight's discussion. Those joining us tonight all held up their hands and took that oath to be impartial.
We have started on an approach that is bipartisan.
We have all listened to hours and hours from the House managers and the President's counsel.
We could debate and argue this until hell freezes over, and the ultimate answer and the result would be the same thing.
That's not to say that we're two ships passing in the night, that we're not listening to each other. We are.
I think what's happening here is too important to be done in private.
He did things that were very wrong, but I do not believe it met the constitutional required standard for removal.
Joining us for this special segment are each of the former Democratic senators you just saw: Max Baucus of Montana, Byron Dorgan of North Dakota, John Breaux of Louisiana, Richard Bryan of Nevada, Ken Conrad of North Dakota, and someone many remember as an outspoken critical Democrat, critical of Bill Clinton during the impeachment, Joe Lieberman of Connecticut. Good evening to all of you. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you. I want to say that nobody looks any different than they did 21 years ago.
Oh, my Lord. I thought Democrats didn't lie. Boy, that's pretty harsh.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Only among friends.
Spoken like a politician, but in good spirits. We want to get into all of this in depth, but I propose beginning with a bit of a lightning round to go all through our esteemed panel here. So starting with a question that is a one-word or one-sentence answer to each of you. Who do you think is the most vital witness, the most important witness in this Ukraine scandal that the Senate should hear from in the trial? And let's go around the horn, starting with Senator Baucus.
Well, it'd be good to hear from John Bolton, but frankly, I don't know if we're going to hear from anybody.
Well, I would love to find out what's inside the mind of Mr. Giuliani, and I think every member of the Senate would benefit from it.
Senator Breaux?
I mean, who ever heard of a trial without witnesses? I think that Mulvaney and Bolton are absolutely essential, and if you get 51 votes, they will be called.
Senator Lieberman?
You know what? I go with any one of the choices mentioned up until now. They'd all be helpful.
Senator Conrad?
Yeah, it's a good roster we've listed. I'd especially like to hear from Giuliani and Mulvaney.
Senator Bryan?
I agree. I'd like to hear from Mulvaney first, but Giuliani clearly is the wild man in this scenario.
Another quick one before we go in depth. Senator McConnell describes the trial that you all participated in as his template thus far. Is that true and fair in your view, Senator Baucus?
It's somewhat true. The rules on whether or not to call witnesses was postponed back then, as McConnell wants to do today. So it's about the same.
Yeah, there's no relationship at all. Ken Starr, for 3.5 years, investigated everything. He got the documents, he got the witnesses, and all of that was presented at the start of the trial. Donald Trump did exactly the opposite. He withheld everything, including witnesses.
Senator Brown?
Well, I mean, the two leaders, I think, need to sit down in a room, lock the door, put out a legal pad on the table, and not leave until they work out an agreement. I mean, that's what Daschle and Senator Lott did back in the Clinton trial, and it worked very well with a 100-0 vote.
Well, John Breaux is absolutely right. Look, an impeachment trial is inherently partisan. The framers of the Constitution understood that. They wrote that in the Federalist Papers. We knew pretty much what the results were going to be in 1999, just like people think they know what the results will be this year. But we managed to do something that probably was going to have a partisan result in a nonpartisan way. And I think the key to it was the relationship between Senator Lott and Senator Daschle.
We met in the old Senate chamber. I'll never forget it.
Yes.
And
Right.
we're able to reach agreement, as others have said, on a unanimous basis on what the rules would be with the trial. And, of course, there is a huge difference because we did have witnesses. The witnesses, including Monica Lewinsky, testified on tape. That was played before members.
Just to add a little footnote, I think my colleagues will recall we did meet at the old Senate chambers, and what was very interesting to me is Phil Gramm, who represents a very conservative point of view, outlined a proposal. Ted Kennedy, on the other side of the political spectrum, said, and I quote, I think we're at third base. And thereafter that, as has been discussed by my colleagues, we reached a unanimous decision. This just is in no way the same situation, totally different in my view. Full display of witnesses in the House, and then we had the videotaping, which many of us spent a lot of time listening to that. So we had the benefit of witness input before any of the proceedings actually began.
You go to the well of the Senate, and there's a giant book, and you sign, you pledge that you are going to do impartial justice. So senators who've already announced what they're going to do. I mean, I'm really taken aback when McConnell says he's working with the White House on how they're going to present their case. He's supposed to be a juror. He's not supposed to take a side. He is going to have to pledge to do impartial justice.
Well, you mentioned that precedent of going for something above partisanship. Each of you, we were looking back at the records, dealt with this, publicly committed to impartiality, and many of you formally critical in public of the president who happened to be in your party. Let's take a look at Senator Joe Lieberman from that period.
Was there ever a time in the last 5 weeks in which you moved close to the idea of conviction?
I did, and it surprised me. I mean, look, every time I've been forced to go into the facts of this case, I get repulsed and I get troubled and torn up.
Beginning with Senator Lieberman, why was it important for you to air that out in public as a juror and not just say, well, if it was the person in my party, then it's all good?
Yeah, well, it was. I felt I did have that responsibility. I had, like everybody, felt repulsed by what President Clinton had done. But then I went back, to my responsibility under the Constitution in an impeachment trial. And it seemed to me that the founders expected impeachment to happen very rarely in American history because the centerpiece of the system they were setting up was elections. And it would have to be a very extreme case where you allowed Congress to overturn an election before another election and take the power away from the people.
Senator Bryan, you backed censuring President Clinton, along with others here. How do you contrast that to Republican senators today who not only aren't backing censuring Trump, several have said they don't need the trial. They've made up their minds. He can't do anything wrong.
Well, I think the big thing, none of us as Democrats had drunk the Kool-Aid. Clearly, the president's conduct was reprehensible, and we all spoke out against it. The real issue was whether his conduct justified a conviction, a removal from office. And I spent a fair amount of time looking at the debates in the Constitutional Convention. So for me, the question was, did his conduct rise to a level where he's to be removed from office? His conduct was reprehensible, as I've said. I concluded it was not, and I'm very comfortable with that vote today. How different it is today when the Republicans have lockstep with the president and don't even think anything he did was even inappropriate.
You say how different it is today. Take a look at someone many of you know who's in the Senate today, Lindsey Graham.
Yeah.
In every trial that there has ever been in the Senate regarding impeachment, witnesses were called.
I am not going to support witnesses being called for by the president. I'm not going to support witnesses being called for by Senator Schumer.
We need witnesses, ladies and gentlemen, to clarify who said what, who's being honest, who's not.
I'm not interested in any witnesses. This thing is a sham, a crock. I don't want to legitimize it. I want to get it over with.
I think that's one of the problems that this particular trial is facing when you have members of the Senate that already declared what the verdict is before they've heard the trial.
Anyone else?
Well, I don't think anybody can explain the circumstance.
I'll go Senator Dorgan and then Senator Baucus on the question on the table is what happened to Lindsey Graham.
Well, I can't explain it. I don't think anybody can explain what happened to Lindsey Graham. Lindsey's been a friend, but you look at that and you say, how on earth do you get from this place to that place?
Well, I was just going to say about Lindsey, who was a good friend, he's got to have had a mind change operation. I mean, it is unbelievable for me to watch Lindsey now, because I remember distinctly Lindsey saying, you can't have a trial without witnesses. Who's ever heard of a trial without witnesses? If you want to get to the truth, you've got to have witnesses. Now he says, we don't need any witnesses. Wow. That is a flip-flop of all time.
I have to say, it is fascinating to hear all of you. I appreciate you reconvening. And I'd be remiss if I didn't note, in fairness and in thanks, 6 senators and there was no filibustering.
You're a good presiding officer.
We've lost our way. We've lost our way.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.